Okay, we're live.
All right, fantastic. Well, welcome everyone to the May 18th meeting of the ACC Deferred Compensation Board. And we'll go ahead and get started this afternoon. And the first item is to approve the minutes from our February 16th meeting that I believe Laura sent those out to everyone. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Fantastic. All right, we've approved the minutes. We have some special guests with us here today to give us some presentations and help us with our discussion, which I really appreciate. And the first item that we have here on the agenda is an update and discussion of the plan design summary. And we have Lilia Pavetta and Roger Pearson. I'm not sure if Roger's with us. Oh, yeah, there he is. Yep, I see you there.
That's me.
From AIG, and they're going to go ahead and lead us through that update and discussion. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Lilia and Roger.
Sure, thank you. And Roger will go over some information on the plans, but I wanted to first introduce myself for those of you that I haven't met. My name is Lilia Pavetta. I am your new relationship manager, and I will partner with you on your strategic administration of your retirement program and to ensure that you also meet your organizational goals. I have been helping plan sponsors for over 27 years. The last 24 with AIG Valak. And even though I'm new to the relationship, I have worked with plan sponsors in Georgia for over 20 years. My son graduated from UGA, so I am very familiar with Athens. So I'm very glad to be here and to continue working with you. We have what we call the plan review that has information for the last year for the plan. Roger is going to go over that first. And then I am going to review the required amendments for the 401A plans and go quickly through that and give you information on the reason for the amendments and the deadlines as well.
All right.
Roger.
Thank you. Thank you, Lilia. And first of all, it's great to see everybody. I know some of you I've only seen video a few times, and then others before the pandemic, I got to see you live. So I'm looking forward to the day we can all get back together in the same room. But we've got some good information to go through with you today. So as Lilia said, I am going to just take a few minutes. I've got about 3 slides I'm going to talk about, and I wanted to take this opportunity, since we're all together, to bring you up to date on an annual plan review. It just gives you some of the numbers, how some of the investments have been going. And then, as Lilia said, she's going to get more into plan design changes. I'll try to mention a couple of those as I go through that you want to be looking out for. And then I know later on in the discussion you're going to be talking more about investment policy statement and so on. So with that, let me see if I can share my screen, and let me get to the right place.
Got it?
Good. Thank you, Lilia. I'm glad that works. Doesn't always. All right. So you were sent this information a little bit earlier today. So if you're following along at all, what I'm doing is I'm pulling a couple of slides out of a very long book. You received a plan review. It's about 45 pages. But I've pulled a couple of pages because they're going to give you an overview and the most impact in the shortest amount of time. As you know, you've got really 3 parts to your plans here. You've got the 457 plan, which is what the employees contribute to. That's their dollars that go in. Then you've got their 401A matching plan. And then you've got the 401A management plan. And about 80% of the assets are in that 457. So that's what I'm going to focus on here, because it'll give you really the best picture across the board on what's happening. So on the screen you're looking at, I'm on page 24 if you're pulling these slides up yourself, and it's the attachment that says ACC review at the top. but don't worry if you can't pull that. Just look here at the screen, and I'm just going to walk through some of this information for you. The first thing that you're going to see here, top line, is about 3 years worth of plan asset growth, sort of a year-over-year snapshot, ending fiscal year 3/31, starting in 20, then 21, then 22. Interestingly enough, it does kind of, the first year ends as the pandemic was beginning, and then you got a 1 year period in the midst of it, and then you got another year that kind of comes out the other side. Plan assets were $39.7 million back in 2020. They had a pretty good bump the next year to $53.7 million. We had a good market, unlike what we're having today, but we had a very good market that year, and then we saw some more growth in the following year, although this was as of the end of March, and March was a little choppy, so it slowed down a bit. Right below that, you're going to see an active participants line. Now, by active, what they mean is those individuals that have put money into the plan during the year, during the time period. And it could have been they put in money for short periods of time. They're just counting anybody that was active, but it gives you kind of an idea of what the numbers typically look like. And you're going to see in 2021, it was running right around 1,300, and then it bumped up to about 1,355. And what was really going on is if you jump to the bottom of the slide, you're going to see a line there for total enrollments by year. And the good news is we've got sort of a normal year to show you prior to 2020, and you had about 206 enrollments that year. The next year, it dropped. And I see this in a lot of groups that we have, whether it be hiring, other reasons, so we had a much lower number. But then rebound the following year up to around 200. So we seem to have gotten back into a little bit more of a normal pattern from where we were before. But this was a good snapshot to show you because of the 3 time periods that you've got to look at here. There's a lot more data behind this that's in this book. So absolutely want to encourage you to go look into it. It's good reference material. There is the next page, page 25, I'm going to go a little bit further. I'm going to expand this out for you. The top line is total participants. Now, a minute ago, I showed you active participants, and that's actually the second line there. You'll see the same numbers again, 1298, 1293, then 1355. Well, right above that 1355, you're going to see 1946. That's the total number of participants, both actives and people not contributing. About 600 people difference there. So you get about 600 that are not contributing, but a lot of those, I would say maybe the majority, are either retirees or just people that have left the organization. You probably don't have a lot of individuals that are just working there and not contributing. But it is something that I want you to remember, because in a minute you're going to hear about plan design changes. And a lot of plans out there have automatic cash outs where if somebody's left the organization, they got a really small account balance, then the organization kind of cashes those out or kind of pushes those out. This is the reason why, because over time you'll end up with more and more people that might have really small accounts that haven't worked here in years, and you're having to continue to kind of watch over that larger number of people. So something just to remember, I wanted to mention to you, if you can remember that difference in those numbers. And the third page and final page I'm going to show you before I turn it over to Lilia is this one here. This is the mutual fund allocation page. Now, this breaks the assets down by age and by the different types of investments. And each one of these blocks you're going to see, there's people in their 20s and 30s and 40s. It breaks them down in decades. And I'm going to come back to the 20s in a minute. I want to skip that one, but I will return to it. But if you look at the people in their 30s and 40s, and you just take a quick look at the graph, it's pretty well diversified, pretty well spread out. We're not too loaded up in any particular area across the board with all these employees, and that's kind of what we want to see, especially people, mid-career, early to mid-career. Now, when you get to the 50s and the 60-plus group, you see that green area gets a whole lot larger, and that's primarily the fixed account. Could be money market and bonds, but it's the more stable investment. That's the safer side. And that becomes more important to the individual that's getting closer to the point they're going to use the money. So we do expect that you're going to see that pattern as people get into their 50s, and especially when they get into 60s, 70s, 80s, they're going to start shifting more into those stable accounts. The one area that I'm going to swing back to that's not quite where we want it is people in their 20s. And it's because of that green you see. You'll see at the bottom of that little block there, it says fixed income at 30%, which is pretty high for people in their 20s. David and I have talked about this, and we're pretty sure what's going on is when you auto-enroll, you have a default investment, and the default, and I see everybody nodding their head, the default is fixed. Now, if David can meet with them, and he gets to meet with a lot of the individuals here, but if he can meet with them, he can explain the importance of diversification and the different investments and so on, and usually people will want to divide that money out. But if he can't get in front of them, then yes, what happens is they get defaulted into a fixed account and they kind of forget about it, and it just stays there. So as you're looking, and I know you're, again, going to be talking a lot about the investment policy statement and changes you're going to be making in the future, you certainly can change this default, and that could begin to address that particular issue. But I did want to point that one out to you. That's the only thing that kind of jumped out at us. Otherwise, for the most part, the balances are pretty good throughout the different age groups, and we're in pretty good shape there. It's just that one area we want to be aware of.
A question for David real quick. Of the new enrollees since the last time we talked, what percentage do you think you're able to engage with? Ballpark.
David, you're on mute.
Sorry. I would say somewhere south of 50% right now, where prior to the pandemic, it was probably running 70% of the people that I was getting in front of.
Yeah. All right. So, Tim, that ties back into the discussion of no contact, default, fixed income, and the reason it's running high.
Yes, sir.
And at this point, unless there's any other questions, I am going to turn it over to Lilia to talk about the plan design side of it, but hopefully that gave you a little bit more to work with starting out. And Lilia, it's all yours.
Sure. Thank you, Roger.
Oh, let me get rid of this. Let me get rid of my sharing here.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, we have drafted the restatement for the two 401A plans that you have in accordance to the IRS Cycle 3 restatement cycle, which requires plan sponsors to restate their plan documents every 6 years. So we have drafted the documents, had a conversation with Laura, and then also provided a summary of each of the plan provisions. It was included on the agenda for today. That's what I would like to spend some time just on those areas that we discussed that could be additions to the plan. Because there were just a couple of those that we needed to get agreements from the committee. Now, the deadline to sign these restatements is July 31st. So we would like to get an understanding of the provisions and get any approvals prior to that so you can sign it within the deadline. So let me share just a portion of the information. So like I said, we had, and let me make sure that you can see it.
Yep, it's there.
Yeah, it is. We went through every single provision on the plan and look at both plans, both the management plan and the matching plan. The only areas that we discussed a possible change were, like Roger mentioned, is the mandatory cash outs. And that involved cashing out those terminated participants that have a balance less than 5,000. Most of our clients are adding that feature because after participants are gone for several years, it's sometimes difficult to know where the new address, sending information, and also it will make your plan easier to administer when you just have a number of the participants that are either active or that they have a balance that they want to continue to keep it in the plan. So the provision will be to add distributions annually, or as often as you will prefer. Usually it's an annual basis. That for those participants that have less than $1,000, we can go ahead and process and send the funds directly to them with a check. We also send notifications to participants 30 days prior to the cash out, so they know that they have an option to cash them on their own. And then for those that have a balance between 1,000 and 5,000, the requirement is to roll them into an IRA, into a rollover IRA. So that way they continue to have those funds for retirement purposes. An option on that is to be able to roll into the rollover IRA all balances, including those under 1,000. But it's up to the plan sponsor to decide if that's what you would like to do.
Lily, is there a default rollover if they don't select their own?
We do have one that we offer. It's called the Millennium Trust Rollover IRA. And we have the agreements and everything to do it automatically. We send the funds directly to them.
Question real quick. Sorry, with the mandatory rollover at that 1,000 to 500 versus the cash out option, is that based on a particular rule or law, or is that just a recommended way to do it? Why is that defined that way?
It is a provision that most of plan sponsors are utilizing on the plan. It is an option to cash out those amounts, and it's not mandatory, but it is in the best interest of plan sponsors to get those smaller balances. That's also helpful, for example, for getting a lower fee at the plan level, because you have fewer accounts with small balances. So it is a positive in general, but it's not mandatory. It's just up to the plan sponsor to add that feature.
The other piece that has value for us as plan administrators in an organization is many people are not aware, believe it or not, that if they roll over to cash, there's a 10% penalty plus a taxable event. And if that occurs, that opens us up, in spite of our efforts to educate them as to what that impact might be, to possible litigation. That's one of the reasons why rolling it over and forcing it out keeps us whole and clean.
Exactly. Yeah. Rollovers. Yeah. In the case of our rollovers, there is not a penalty, but if they take the funds in cash, it is, unless they roll it. So they can also roll it over on their own, but it makes it safer to roll it to a rollover IRA. You're right.
Lilia, is this based on inactivity of the accounts? Is that why you cash them out?
Yes, it is only for those that terminated. And of course, the portion that is vested will be cashed out. For those that you have one of the plans that have a vesting schedule. The portion that is non-vested will be forfeited, and you can use that to offset any future employer contributions.
So the forced rollovers would simply be those people that are no longer working and by choice or termination, as opposed to retirees who may in fact still be in the system.
Correct. Yes.
Non-employees who are not retirees.
Yeah, well, and we can look at that as well, because it could be maybe a person that is retired with a small balance. It might be part of that, because in the system they show us terminated. But we can also review that on the ongoing basis, and if the criteria is not to cash out retired participants, we can work on that as well. But in general, most likely a retired participant will have a bigger balance if they have been contributing for a few years. Any other questions on that? The other thing is we discussed about the minimum required distribution, which is now 72. And that will not be included in this amendment because that's part of the Secure Act. So it will be on an amendment that we have in the future. The language for that, since that was passed a couple of years ago, has not been released by the IRS, so we don't have that in this restatement, but we will have it on any subsequent ones. Then the other thing will be the normal retirement age. And when we discussed this with your team there, it was a difference in the retirement age for the firefighters. So it will be 60 years of age for public safety employees. So we will make that change as well, based on, of course, your approval. And then when it comes to the early retirement age, the plan documents right now show only 55, but we confirmed that it's going to be 55 plus 10 years of continuous service. So those are the things that need to be approved. And then after that, then Laura can have the documents signed, and we can just update our system with any changes.
Lily, going back to the mandatory cash outs and the information that Roger provided us showing that there was about 650 inactive participants currently. Do we know how many of those 650 would fall into this less than $5,000 range?
We can definitely run a report and get that information. It actually changes from month to month or quarter, depending, of course, on the market. But we can give you an approximate number of those that are just right there under the threshold of 5,000. Yes, we definitely can see. I don't have it in front of me, but it's very easy to run a report.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you separate that report? And I don't know if you have the data on your end so that we call out the retirees.
We can definitely run the report and then check with Laura and the team there to see if any of those are retired.
Okay, so that we get a true termination number for rollovers.
Exactly.
Tim, are you thinking defer decision until we see those numbers and understand it better?
Oh, we can discuss the merits here. I mean, what do y'all think? I think we can still decide on what we wanted to do without those numbers. Just that'll help us kind of, inform us what the impacts might be. But
I think if you're going to force a rollover, you go it from $0 and take all the liability off the table.
I'm seeing that more and more. The plan sponsors are adding that feature.
I mean, that does make sense. It cleans it up better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it doesn't leave the unified government exposed in any way because it's a consistent policy from $1 and covers everybody. What they do with it after they've rolled it over is their choice, but forcing the rollover takes that liability off the table for us.
Sure.
Lily, do you see any negative consequences in us taking that direction instead of at 1,000?
No, I think it's the safest way. And once we do the one catch up at one point for the first cash outs, then every year is a much smaller amount. I see that in most of my clients. That the first one, it seems like it's, and we will do communication. We will make sure that everybody knows the reason why they're getting that rollover.
Does anybody else have any other questions or concerns with any of these 4 changes here?
Not with the 4 changes that we've discussed, but I do just have a question. This plan design summary, is this something that we look towards doing every year on the whole plan, and make discussions about maybe other aspects that are not commented on here, or how does that work?
We can. We usually do it just when it's a change or when there is a need to know more about each specific plan provision. but yeah, we can actually discuss that every year if that's what you would like to add to the agenda.
Well, I think where I'm going with it partially is that, I mean, we've had some discussion about the formula that we have in place. And when you looked at Roger's, what he presented earlier, and one of the things I saw was the benchmark of what the 457 plan has in it with plans across the country, and then what we have in it. And we're somewhere like at $22,000 or $25,000, whereas the benchmark for other plans is over $100,000. So clearly, we've got to start looking at and addressing how to drive more dollars into this plan, get more people involved, and keep them involved. And that goes to the formula in my mind. We've not changed this formula as long as I've been here, and I've been here 15 years. And I'm sure it wasn't changed before that. So nobody on the board can be happy with a 1% match. I'm not. And we need to come up with a formula that drives more, increases people wanting to save, to put money into these plans. And I think it's kind of on us a little bit to come up with something like that, not just leave it out there, for the individuals to say, well, I get 1%, so, I have to put in 4% to get to that. And then they leave it at that. That's the end of it. There's no more thought process because they don't feel like they're being, there's not like a step. Maybe you 2% to go 6%, 4% by the county to go 10%. So the person at the end of the day, when he gets to his 50s, he's saving 15% or something along those lines, and the county's contributing partially to that. And now you've got a better savings program for a retirement program for people that are in this plan. And I think that's something the board has to discuss, because that obviously means some sort of, commission approval and things like that. But in today's day and time, where it's so hard to get good employees and keep them, this is just another way that we can enhance and make it really valuable to new hires, and figure out how we don't drive them to a fixed option when they sign up. I can't believe we can't just put a paper in front of somebody and say you get fixed option, or you can put it into the aggressive fund or whatever else when they sign up. And then before David even gets to them, they've made their own choice, but at least they had an option other than just the fixed option. Why would we put them in the, I'm just, trying to figure that part of it out.
I agree with John. I think, especially in the current job market, anything that would help incentivize retention of current employees would be good, and that's one way to do it. So I definitely think that's something we should explore further. And I recall we did ask at some point about what would be the budgetary impacts if we did increase the matching. I don't know if we saw those numbers yet or not, but I think that's something we need to make sure we see.
We can help you with that calculation. I was just working on another client's calculation on a tier formula based on years of service. So we can discuss what you think you would like to have, and I can work with our consulting team to create those calculations, projections, and the difference in cost as well.
Yeah,
I would remind the board that last meeting we presented a timeline that we're going to follow, where Aon is helping us review all of our retirement plan options and offerings. And so that is where we would get that data straight from AIG and incorporate that into our study, and add that to the information that we already have from the survey and the focus groups, and then we can bring that to the board.
Tim, I'm assuming this is a budgeted line item if we were to change the match, right?
It would definitely have budgetary impacts that would have to be included into the budget.
So what would the timing be for first cut of a 22-23 budget? I know you guys are in the final phases of the dance right now, but for next year, what would be a drop dead date for us to have some kind, if that's the way we go, to make sure that we're following a time schedule that it would be included in next year's budget if we make a recommendation?
I believe that the timeline that Laura kind of provided, right? I mean, I think the expectation is the fall that we would have. Yeah. So that would line up
All right.
very well with the budgetary process for FY24.
You understand why I'm
submit,
asking that question, right? So we don't miss the window and now we got a 2-year lag. If,
Definitely.
okay,
We submit our budget proposals in the first week of January. If we have a new initiative, we need to get that to them before Christmas. This would be we would have, and David, don't let me overstep here. We might have a little leeway with timing, given that this is associated with a revenue account. But typically we like to follow the late December, early January deadlines for budget submission.
And so that, Laura, if I'm correct, we would normally have a meeting November,
In November,
right?
yes.
Yeah. So I mean that would actually land pretty well for us to be able to, as long as we have this information provided to us, and that's the way the calendar has it in the fall, earlier fall, then hopefully we can make a decision on this in November and have that recommendation go forward for the budget cycle.
Yeah, and given that we are entering into a very pivotal fiscal year for the Deferred Comp Board, if we're going to look at this, I could offer to, I haven't talked to you separately, Tim, about this, but if the board would like me for the August meeting to go ahead and shore up a work plan and the dates associated with certain tasks, I can do that. I'm doing that for the pension board. That's why I bring it up here. And that we can be sitting on ready in August to pursue and hit the milestones that we need to as the fiscal year progresses. So with the board's permission, I'll do that for you guys as well. That would be, I would present at the August meeting a calendar of meetings, and then coordinate with Aon to make sure that we're hitting those milestones, and then develop a basic work plan that y'all could vote on at the next meeting and adopt.
and John, to your point about the benchmarks being so much higher,
Yes.
I think it's really a combination of the issue you raised, as well as the significant overweight we have collectively in the fixed account and the accretive impact that has over, negative accretive impact that has over time. So it's not just the match, it's where they're putting the money.
Well, that, I agree, and I appreciate you bringing that out. I guess it's just hard for me to understand during the hiring process. I guess I need more information, why there's not more options given, why they're just defaulted into the fixed income, why that's a default and it's not an option for the new employee. At least if you're hiring somebody in his 40s or 50s, he might actually know to go with something a little bit more aggressive. So I'm trying to understand that part of it wouldn't even be an issue if they had different options.
And I think that's something we're going to cover today, correct? In the investment policy statement?
That's correct, yes.
Well, but before we pivot into that, is there any more? Lily, do you have any more to go over with us here, or if not, if there's any more questions for Lilia before we move on to that part?
And Lilia, what do you need back from us by when?
Well, for the plan documents, I need a response by the middle of June. That way we can get that signed before the July 31st deadline.
It sounds to me like everybody's on board with those changes that we would have as part of this. And does everybody feel good about the having this be at the $0 mark with the rollover rather than at 1,000 like that was discussed?
Yes.
Okay. And Laura, do we need to go ahead and and vote on this so that we can actually enact the documents in that timeline? Or
I don't believe so. And Sherry, you can correct me on this. In the past, we did not have a deferred comp board. The last time we reviewed this, it was done administratively. And so I don't think it requires a motion and minutes documentation to enact changes to the plan design.
I was just, I would think it'd be safer to vote, but I don't.
You
Let's see. I'm looking at the bylaws real quick.
we just didn't have a board before. And so this was handled administratively, and it was like, that's what we want to do, and we're going to sign off on that. And it was a professional decision. But now that we do have a board,
Right.
some things, and certainly some things remain in the administrative realm.
It's something structurally significant. So potentially the board votes on authorizing the administrative change to be executed.
Right. So looking at our bylaws, under Article 5, Section C, it says decisions of the board shall be by a majority vote. And so I would think this is a decision. So I would say that I would vote.
Okay.
That's my advice.
It sounds like everybody is on board here, so I don't think it's going to cause any issues. So if there is a motion to accept these changes to the plan design.
So moved.
made.
Okay, I think I heard a motion there from Chief Daniel, and I'll take the second as from Dennis. Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, fantastic. Motion carries. Lilia, do you need anything else from us at this point, or?
No, that's it. I will confirm with our plan documents team, and we'll get those final copies to Laura as soon as possible.
Fantastic. Well, thank you and Roger for being with us and presenting all of that and working with us on this. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome.
All right. Well, now we'll move on to discussing the draft investment policy statement, and we've got Mark Manning with Aon here with us. So, Mark, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you. And I assume everybody can hear me well?
Yes.
Excellent. I always get nervous on these calls in case my microphone's not working, and sometimes it doesn't. So good to know it's working. I sent out 2 documents ahead of this meeting. One is a draft investment policy statement, which I'm sure everybody was excited to read. They tend to be a little bit dry and boring, but important nonetheless. And then the other one is a document that is really what we call an investment structure review, a document to go through kind of our thoughts on your investment structure and any recommendations we would make to improve the structure, along with some of our philosophical views on defined contribution investment structures. And so I think it might make sense to walk through the investment policy statement first, and then we can talk about investment structure if that works with you all. I can share my screen, I hope. If I can get this. So hopefully everybody can see the investment policy statement.
Yep.
Document. Okay. And so, one thing when we put this together, I don't know you as well. So certainly if there's something from a viewpoint or, historical view that you all have, we can certainly edit this. It's your document. At the end of the day, we just provided the draft and certainly can help you think through what should be included, what is included here. And so if we jump down to the second page, these are the sections we included, an overview and purpose of the investment policy philosophy. This is an optional section that some of our clients like to include if there's any philosophical view the board has, on investments or risk and return or whatever the case may be, you could include something here. Not necessary. I think most of my clients don't include a philosophical section, but left it in case there was something the board wanted to include. Roles and responsibilities of the various players, from the board to the record keeper to any advisors you might hire. And then we get into structure, what the structure we think should look like, what the investment guidelines, selection, and retention criteria when evaluating the various funds in your investment lineup. We have a section on investment advice and managed accounts. I know you have a managed account provider or solution offered through AIG, which certainly something to keep an eye on and monitor ongoing. Brokerage window, which you also offer as well, and then proxy voting, and then brokerage and other related expenses. And so those are the main sections that we think should be included in an investment policy. So if we go down to the next page, really, the first section talks about the plan. We list the plan names. One thing we usually include at least for ERISA plans, is some language around that the plan is subject to ERISA and qualified under ERISA. I know you guys are not, or your plan is not an ERISA plan, but sometimes for non-ERISA plans or governmental plans, there's some kind of state rules and regs that you might include, or local statutes that have some language there. So something you could add, not required. The other thing I would note in this section is, the second paragraph, we refer to the plans. It's in the intent of the board that the plans comply with ERISA. Certainly, you don't have to do that. A lot of clients I've worked with that are non-ERISA have language in there because they functionally operate as if they were complying with ERISA, even though they're not required to. So it could be as simple as if you said, no, let's take out all ERISA references, which is fine. You could just take out that second sentence, for example, and then just say the plan will provide reasonable and diversified investment choices and so forth. Because I think that is, certainly good practice to provide investment choices across a range of, expected risk and return levels, and sufficient information to make informed decisions. So certainly you would probably want to do that even if you don't have the ERISA reference in there. So just something to think about. And then I think the rest of this page is relatively self-explanatory, nothing showing me material, but keep in mind the purpose is to set forth the guidelines and objectives, and then define the responsibilities and duties of the various players, as I noted in the table of contents on the previous slide or the previous page. Any comments or questions on this section or thoughts?
This is David Boyd. I would recommend that if we aren't required to comply with ERISA, and we're not going to do so, we're not going to make ourselves comply with ERISA, but I'm not sure it's a good idea to add it's the intent. I'm not a lawyer, but it just seems like anytime you put that language in, you open yourself up to litigation.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. One thing I meant to mention earlier is if there's something in here that you don't think you're going to do or comply with, let's take it out, right? Is the easiest policy. So good point there. On the next page, as I mentioned, the philosophy section, it could be anything. I don't know if the board has a philosophy or thoughts. The example we included here is non-securities lending. So some committees, especially post-2008, said, hey, we don't want any securities lending, for example, and that's when, passive strategy will loan out securities to investors who want to short the stock or bet the stock's going to go down. If there's a liquidity crunch like we saw in 2008, there can be issues. So that's just an example. Others have thoughts on, preferred risk return postures, maybe a little bit lower risk overall. But as I mentioned, not required, not necessary, just really if there's some kind of overarching theme or philosophy that the board has and that would like to include it. Under section 3, the roles and responsibilities, I think pretty straightforward. We list the board's roles. First one, work with an investment advisor. I don't think you have an investment advisor ongoing. I don't know if that's a plan or not, but certainly if you're not going to, you can take out that bullet. But essentially, the responsibilities of the board: make investment decisions, oversee the assets, ensure the proxies are being voted in the best interest of plan participants. That's an interesting note. I don't know how proxies have been historically handled. And AIG, you may know. I know some record keepers send them directly to participants to vote, and these are proxies on mutual funds. So if a mutual fund decides to change its board of directors or change its mandate on how they invest or other changes, they issue proxies and they solicit votes. A lot of times they'll go to the fiduciary committee or board to vote those on behalf of plan participants. And to the extent you receive those, it's important to vote them in the best interest of plan participants. Sometimes they're sent directly to participants, so it's off your plate. I don't know, Lily, if you know what has historically been done or what your capabilities are as far as passing them directly on. A lot of plans like to do that because it's just a lot simpler and you don't have to address them when they come to you.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's the way we do it.
Okay.
The individual proxies are distributed, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So you may not need that language, but it doesn't hurt to say, to the extent you ever receive one, you'll vote it in the best interest of participants. And then, of course, review the IPS, determine the investment mini structure, which we'll talk about today. And then, ongoing monitoring, looking at the investment performance, the fees, administrative fees, and those are the fees being charged by AIG to administer the plan, and those types of things are the responsibilities of the board. Included the investment advisor section to the extent you want to leave it in there. If you ever hire an investment advisor on an ongoing basis, you can use that language. Participants, of course, are responsible for determining their allocation and how they're going to invest. The investment managers, of course, manage the assets, and then the record keeper and trustee, I think in your situation, they're the same, AIG retirement, and providing statements to participants, maintaining plan assets, keeping records, things like that, reporting market values, cash flows, and so forth. So I think that's pretty straightforward, or at least I hope it is, but any questions so far or on that section? Okay, doesn't sound like it. And then the next section.
I do want to ask a question. Where you have self-directed brokerage window, I know currently we have one with the plan we have, Schwab, something or other. And, I looked at that and I mean, it's really complicated and it limits what you can invest in. Do any of these plans, in your experience, do they allow people to go in if they're going to do one of these niche tiers, so to speak? Do they allow people to invest in stocks, individual?
I think that's, I don't know exactly how it's set up, Lily. I don't know if on the brokerage side, if it's only mutual fund only or if it's open to everything.
It's usually mutual funds. Schwab has a bigger contract too, but my understanding that this one is just the mutual funds, a bigger universe of the mutual funds available.
Okay.
Yeah, I know what the current one has. It also allows some ETFs, I believe, but I mean, do any of these plans, in your experience, do they include the ability to purchase individual stocks?
Yeah, so I guess my understanding is your plans do not. From my experience, most plans do allow it, which is unique. I think, I mean, our general recommendation is if you're going to use a brokerage window, keep it limited to mutual funds only. or mutual funds and ETFs, but preferably mutual funds only, because even in the ETF space, you can invest in leveraged ETFs and get yourself in a little bit more trouble than I would prefer in a defined contribution plan. So that's generally our preference is mutual fund only if you are going to offer it.
I would also say too that those self-directed brokerage windows can be a little confusing if you're not used to using them. So I guess the less number of options and the more simple it is, the better it'll be and the safer it'll be.
Okay. So Section 4 just talks about structure, and when we look at your investment structure, this will tie in nicely, I hope. But the tier 1 is your professionally managed options. So it could be target date, it could be managed accounts. In your situation, you have managed accounts and you have a balance fund. One of the recommendations we would make is to consider whether or not it makes sense to offer a target date fund. So we'll talk about that in the next section. Tier 2 is your passive options, low cost index funds, which you have a number of. And then tier 3, your active funds, the funds that participants can choose to try to outperform the market and do a little bit better. And then, of course, brokerage window. And so that's how it lines up. Also ties into the next page, which talks about, asset allocation, capital preservation, income growth, and retirement income. One thing I would note, you don't offer a retirement income solution. This is a emerging topic, if you will, or emerging area for defined contribution plans. And that's really thinking about offering an investment that helps pay out account balances post-retirement. Relatively new. Most plans don't offer it today, but certainly something to think about. I think it is growing in the industry, or at least conversations are growing. So frankly, I included it just to bring your attention to it. You don't offer it, you should probably, unless there's a desire to really think about it, take it out, at least for now. But to the extent you ever think about it in the future or offer something like that, you can use this language to add it back in. But just wanted to, I think, in the draft, I just put more so you're aware of it, but probably not needed in your current state today. And then Section 5, a little bit about the guidelines. One of the things we like to help, when we work with clients, is really thinking about how do you evaluate your managers, and this goes through some of the considerations to think about when looking at investment managers, the business, the ownership structure, how the business is organized, things like that, investment staff, quality of personnel, depth of resources, because there are varying degrees within the investment industry, what their process is, what the risk management looks like, how they perform. I mean, that's the bottom line importance to your participants. Operationally, are they in line with what they should be doing? And then fees, of course. I think fees are always critical when talking about investments, because those directly impact your returns and your participants' returns.
Mark, can I jump back to page 6 for a moment?
Absolutely.
Under the target date investment options, the language in the last sentence says age-appropriate target date funds will serve as the plan's primary default alternative.
Yeah, so that's
which is something we've been talking about as an alternative to fixed.
Yeah, it's currently not in your plan today. When we get into the structure review, we do recommend target date funds to use in these types of plans and to default there. And the reason is, and to the point made earlier, if you're in the fixed account, clicking away at 2 or 3% a year, you're just not going to be ready for retirement over a 40 or 45-year career, to the extent you would be if you were in a more aggressive target date fund that was professionally managed and de-risked as you age and you approach retirement.
Okay, so the appropriate place for that decision for us as a board is within the IPS as opposed to the product mix. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think the investment So I think it's an investment structure decision. And then if the board said, yes, let's use target date, and yes, let's have it as a default, then it can be included in the IPS and approved at that level as well. So I think both sides, really.
So Tim, given that, what do we as a board need to do if that's the direction we end up going?
Well, we'll have to, actually vote on adopting our IPS when we have the final, and kind of like what Mark was saying there. I mean, if we have that language in there, that will set that as the default. But yeah, we're gonna have to go through and do both. But
Okay. I'm trying to get to the finish line.
we'll get there.
I mean, the reality is you could approve it today, but you don't have a target date in place, and it would take time and all that. So it's they run parallel to some extent. And so we touched on Section 5. The bottom of Section 5, top of what is this page? Page 8. Benchmarking. Just a reminder, to benchmark managers against an appropriate benchmark index, peer group median, and so forth, and fees as well.
All right.
Section.
I have one other question.
Of course.
Are you finding in other investment policy statements that when you're talking about investment guidelines, selection, retention criteria, that particular guidelines relative to performance against the larger market in the selection of accounts or available investments is in the IPS, or is that outside? And that, for example, all funds that are selected need to be in the top 25% quartile, et cetera, et cetera. Is that language that's IPS specific, or is that resides somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, quite often we do see them in investment policy statements. The one thing, we generally don't like to see are specific requirements. So if the fund must outperform the benchmark on a 3 and 5 year basis. If it doesn't, we're going to put it on a watch list, monitor for 4 quarters, and if it doesn't improve, we'll replace it. Because you don't want to paint yourself into a corner and create tripwires that you may not want to take. So we try to give more flexibility so that the committee can evaluate and think about things. You can, in your review, think, hey, we want to outperform on a 3 and 5 year basis, or, be in the top quartile, or whatever the case may be. There will be times where very good managers underperform, and there are very good reasons why they do that. And it could be specific style reasons, or the market, there are specific styles out of favor, and how they're doing it is out of favor. And we wouldn't want to create a situation where you're, potentially replacing managers that are going to rebound, and you're constantly making changes, just chasing returns, so to speak.
So the language you just shared that's more generic than quantifiable specifics, that's not in here, correct?
There's no quantifiable specifics in here, correct?
Should we have some quantifiable specifics, even if they're, triggers or some set of expectations around what good looks like?
You could add language to say, I've seen it, generally speaking, each manager should outperform a stated benchmark or stated peer group over, the majority of rolling 3-year periods, or over the long term. But once again, any kind of short-term specifics can create tripwires that we generally don't recommend.
All right. So
but as I said, it's your IPS. So something the committee feels that it's important, you can certainly do that, but we generally don't recommend it.
Mark, I guess like with the language like that around those setting those specific goals, or at least what we want to strive for, would that be kind of the thing that's like put into those philosophy elements that are sometimes included, or?
I would probably include it in this section 5 under benchmarking.
Okay.
Sometimes you see it in an appendix where you list the managers, list the index, and the peer group that you're going to evaluate it against, and have some kind of footnote there that says, these managers are expected to outperform benchmark and stated peer group over, the long term or over, whatever you feel is appropriate as far as an evaluation metric. Is that helpful? Any other questions?
I think it's good. Yeah.
Okay. So managed account section 6, since you do offer them, my understanding also is that there's an additional fee for this service. Lily, once again, if I'm incorrect on that, please correct me. But to the extent that participants are paying an additional fee, it's important to monitor that service as well. So there's some language here to help, evaluate that. Once again, it's, some data about, have there been any changes to the computer model, which is the computer engine is Morningstar, any staffing changes, anything about how, maybe AIG is using the model, things like that. We want to make sure that, we do look at that, or that is evaluated. It's important. And I think AIG should be able to provide a reporting on how that's being used with participants as well. And they may have already been providing those reports. Self-directed brokerage window section here to make sure, the key thing here is you don't want to, start to evaluate the underlying fund options. You have no requirement to do that. But as far as, making sure the window is operating properly, is there any feedback from participants? You can always look at fees and make sure they are reasonable for the various trades and account management fees and things like that, or annual fees. Just want to make sure you're periodically looking at that. So we included that section. And then section 8 talks about proxy voting. As we addressed earlier, I think those are being passed on to participants, but just language about, the investment managers will vote proxies on the individual stocks and securities that they own as they see fit. And then to the extent anything is issued to the board, you all will be responsible. And I have a committee there. I need to change that to board, so do that. And then section 9 just quickly talks about brokerage, and the key thing here is managers are expected to seek best execution in all trades. They generally follow that. I was thinking about, have I ever seen a situation where somebody didn't? And I don't think I have. They're generally required to follow best execution, but have some language in there for that purpose.
Mark, given what the folks from AIG said about the distribution of proxies to the individual shareholders, should that language change? Because they're putting an onus on them that they don't have.
It should. Yeah, I mean, the key thing we have, the board will be responsible for voting proxies that it receives. So you could take it out. It's not critical. You're passing it on, but to the extent, which it doesn't sound like you'll ever get into this situation, or at least in the near future, where you receive one, you could take out that last paragraph under section 8. I don't have a strong opinion either way.
But Mark, this language doesn't hold us to this. So basically, this gives us coverage if we ever were to have to act as proxies. It kind of gives us guidance. Correct?
Yes, correct. But it doesn't sound like it's going to be an issue. So. Any other questions or thoughts on the investment policy?
what's the timeline in the process to finalize and approve?
Laura, was there a timeline for others? I mean, I'm assuming that we could spend the next time until the next meeting kind of reviewing this and trying to think if there's any changes, and hopefully just vote on it at our July meeting.
That's up to the board. If you want to compile input and discuss it. Our next meeting is scheduled for August. Let me give you an exact date. Looks like our next meeting is scheduled for August 17th. You can certainly have a special call meeting in between now and August 17th as well.
Would there be some value in asking AIG to make recommendations relative to age-based target funds on a parallel path so that we are prepared to make that move when we approve the IPS?
Sure. And we have a fund selection team that can review both the IPS and the funds selection. Now, we do have quite a few plan sponsors that have chosen those target date funds as the default. And that's what I see more and more.
Yeah, I'm just saying, rather than get a final IPS, approve it, then turn around and say, all right, we need to go find some funds. We ought to run a parallel path on the assumption we're going to go that direction.
Correct. And if you have the fund family that you would like to use, then we can definitely include that into the fund lineup.
Well, I think we're also looking for some advice and counsel from you relative to what the options are and what other people are doing.
Okay. Yeah, I can definitely work with that.
What other plans are doing in that area as kind of their default choices.
And that's one of the things we're also going to provide after the investment structure discussion, so we'll share our thoughts as well on that. So,
right. Yeah, we're looking for guidance.
Get two ideas.
I'm thinking a parallel path gets us, again, I got a goal to get to the finish line, so.
Yep.
And just with the board, there was a few things kind of recommended here, but left as options, and just try to get an idea from everyone what we want to include. I mean, so David brought up a good point of us striking the ERISA reference there towards the beginning. Another one of the options was the philosophy. Does anybody feel strongly about including philosophy onto here, or keeping that as not included?
Can anybody define our current philosophy?
Yeah, I don't think it's possible at this point. I think if we, maybe a year or two after we implement a policy and get a financial advisor, we could define that. But right now, I don't know how we define the philosophy.
Yeah. I agree with David.
I do too.
Okay. And then another one of the things that Mark brought up was the correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, it was the retirement income solutions component, right?
Retirement income. I frankly left it in there to bring your attention to it, but probably shouldn't be in there unless you're doing something in that space and you're not today.
So is that an administered activity that really the pensioner or the owner of that account is then asking for some reoccurring distribution from that account as opposed to an RMD? Or
yeah, it's really an investment option that can be added to the plan. Can take many shapes or forms. It could be a fund that has some kind of payout stream so that the participant just has a recurring payment coming to them, for example. It could be some kind of insurance product included in the plan.
annuities?
Yeah, things like that. But that's a much bigger discussion. And, you know, as I noted, it's a topic a lot of plans are talking about, but nobody's going down the insurance route. Some have started saying, hey, let's look at fund vehicles that have a payout stream. And some products are being built into target date funds as well. But even implementing those, it's very low right now. Most plans just aren't doing it. So, you know, like I said, it's something I want to make you aware of, but not an area where you guys are using it and not many people are.
Yeah, my understanding of that right now is it's kind of like Pandora's box.
Well, if we took it out, can we put it back in later, down the road?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
We can modify the investment policy statement by decision at any time.
Okay. So it wouldn't hurt then to just amend that and take it out for the time being.
I would agree.
Okay. So it sounds like everybody's on the same page with that one too.
Mhm.
All right, and how's everyone feel? And Laura, does that line up with like you said, presenting the work plan in August? If we went ahead and didn't vote on this until the August meeting, would that work, or would it be more beneficial for us to hold a special called meeting to have this in place before then?
It's really up to the board. Certainly, if having a special call can speed the process along, so that we have it fully vetted and adopted before fall gets away from us. Because if it didn't happen in August, then our next meeting would be in November. But it is up to the board, I think, and we'll certainly move forward with Aon and the timeline of reviewing the retirement plan offerings. We'll be doing that administratively throughout the fiscal year. But anything that this board does to make sure that we have guidance on what your leadership is with regard to deferred comp, looking out for the employees, you know, we'd want to have that in place as we you know, proposed that budget and defended it, if that makes sense.
Yes.
John, what would your turnaround time be on a kind of final draft for approval?
Who are you asking that to, Dennis?
To John from
Mark?
Or Mark, I'm sorry, Mark. My apologies.
Yeah, it really depends on your timing. I don't think there's a specific time frame. I know we have the investment structure review we wanted to cover today. We're running out of time, so I'm not sure how far we can get into that. So if you all are willing to have a special meeting, I think, you know, personally, I think that makes a ton of sense. So we don't have to wait until August.
Okay. And Mark, if we're going to call a special call meeting, do you feel like this would just be a good stopping point then, and we would continue on then, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I mean, I can give a high level review of what we included in the structure. So you all can review prior to the next meeting, or we can cut off here as you wish.
Or distribute it so that we've got an opportunity to review it and answer the meeting and come back with questions.
Yeah, if you can, just go ahead and give us a really brief high overview, and that way everyone can kind of review the documents themselves too, and we'll go ahead and choose a time for a special call meeting.
Yeah, I think, let me try to share real quick. I'll just go to if it makes sense, I will go to the, let's see, just this kind of the summary slides. Can you see the Athens-Clarke County Deferred Compensation Investment Program Review?
Yes.
Excellent. And so we talked about policy and structure. I guess overarching philosophy is we do believe simplified investment lineups help participants make better decisions. And the key thing to remember is, as a participant, they're going in and, if they're not defaulted into the fixed account or if they're not going into managed accounts, they're really trying to make their investment allocation decision. So if you think about an average participant going in, first decision might be, okay, how much money do I put in stocks versus bonds? And once they make that decision, how much money do I put in U.S. stocks versus non-U.S. stocks? And then once they make that decision, how much do I put in large cap U.S. versus small cap? And you can see those, multiple decisions that need to be made across various asset classes. So we do think, streamlining makes more sense for participants. And the key thing here is not only just, even though it's fewer choices, having broader mandates and not taking away diversification opportunities to participants. That's kind of our overarching theme, and we can dig deeper into that. As we look at your investment lineup, this is where it stands today. And so we talked about the tier structure. You have the balanced funds and the managed account, which is included here. But the tier 2, the passive funds, the various BNY, S&P, fixed income, S&P, mid and small cap, international passive strategies, which we like. We think that makes a ton of sense. But really where we see maybe too many options would be in large cap. You have 4 large cap funds and 4 SMID, which is small and mid cap. And so the key area where we would recommend is looking at maybe 1 large cap fund that's broad, that covers both growth, core, and value, instead of having specific options that cover your growth, core, and value that you have today. Similar in the small cap space, you've got your mid value, mid growth, small value, small growth. So just offer 1 SMID manager that can go small cap, mid cap, and also value through growth, so that your participants aren't having to make those decisions, trying to figure out how much money do I put in growth versus value and timing those decisions. That's the key area. I think also if you look at, just the observations, from an asset allocation standpoint, recommend offering target date funds. And certainly when we meet again, we can dig deeper into each of these. Capital preservation, we think you're in alignment where most plans are, the fixed account, money market. Income, I did include here current offerings in alignment. You do offer a PIMCO fund, which we like. It's very well diversified. However, there is also a high yield fund. So one consideration might be to consolidate in the fixed income space. A lot of plans don't offer high yield simply because, participants may not understand the full risks. High yield is junk bonds. It's below investment grade. It's low quality debt. High yield sounds really good. And so unless you dig deeper and really understand what that means, somebody could misunderstand it. Growth, consolidation. And then the last one I would just touch on, inflation protection. You have both a TIPS fund, which is a Treasury Inflation Protected Securities Fund, which invests in TIPS, right? And those are Treasury bonds that adjust with inflation. So they're a great inflation hedge. You also have REITs, which are real estate investment trusts, 2 different funds. And they're also a great inflation hedge. What we're seeing a lot of plans do these days is go to a diversified inflation protected fund, which not only includes TIPS and REITs, but also other inflation hedging assets. So commodities, could be precious metals, that are managed accordingly, so that the manager can go into TIPS if they feel that the market's right for TIPS, or commodities or REITs as they see fit. So something a little bit more diversified as far as an inflation hedge. And those are the key areas of recommendations. Just jumping ahead, number of slides here. And so what the lineup would look like going forward, over on the left, looking at a target date fund manager, and so implementing that, and then really the boxes are the rectangles, if you will, with the dotted lines as areas where we would recommend changes to the investment structure.
So
essentially,
more asset allocation inside individual funds as opposed to an aggregation of multiple funds.
You got it. So no loss of diversification, no loss of asset classes, but fewer options, easier decision-making for participants, and broader mandates. And certainly we can go through all the reasons we think this makes sense and a rationale behind it, but just wanted to give you the bottom line and the overview in the last few minutes that we have today.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, appreciate that.
And I know that was way too quick. So hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, I think it's a good setup though for the next time that we meet then. And so I guess if our next regular scheduled meeting was August, for us to have a special call, we'd be looking at, I guess, June or July, late June or July. So what, Mark, would that work with, how much time would you need to have? Maybe if we came back and we gave you some of the direction that we wanted to have on the IPS, getting that finished up and then brought back to us.
Yeah,
Like,
I was planning on cleaning up the IPS for the 3 topics we talked about today, sending that back out for circulation and you all can review it. And so we can meet anytime you want. I'm out of town early July, but outside of that, anytime.
Well, knowing that July is usually kind of a bad time here in Athens too, for everybody trying to get away. So maybe we could look at late June possibly. Laura, could we maybe send out just a inquiry on people's availability, possibly do a doodle or something like that. Just try to pick that special date. I think you're muted, Laura.
If we like the Wednesday at 3:30 time slot, if we look at June 22nd or 29th, if any of those dates look, but I can certainly do a doodle poll.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm good with those, so yeah, whatever.
Is for anybody else, John?
Both those dates would work, yeah, for me. That's fine.
Okay. What about so what about June 22nd, which would basically be about a month from now? Does anybody have an issue with that then on June 22nd?
At 3:30.
Yeah, I do, Commissioner Goodson.
Okay.
Out of town that day.
That's fine, Chief. What about the following week then, the June 29th?
That works for me.
That works for you? Does that work for everybody else? All right. Fantastic. Okay. So June 29th, it will be at 5:30. And so we'll have the
5:30 is it or 3:30?
I'm sorry, 3:30. 3:30.
3:30.
Okay. And so then we'll have the revised IPS circulated, and then hopefully we can vote on that meeting and adopt this.
Okay.
Okay, so we should also parallel track the work from AIG relative to feedback on age-targeted funds and what we might look at selecting, so that if we approve and that is part of that document, we're prepared to make those changes.
Exactly.
Or at
Yes.
least review those options for the purposes of specifically selecting a default vehicle, either then or at the August meeting.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and we can make those changes. We just have to amend the agreements with the new funds and then communicate the changes to all the participants. So we can do that.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, I think we have everything kind of lined up here for our next few months. This is good. Does anybody have anything else before we wrap up? No? All right. Okay. Well, appreciate everybody. And I guess is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right. The ayes have it. Okay. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again on June 29th.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone for being here. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Lilia. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Mark.
Tim, feel better.
Thanks, Dennis. Appreciate it. See you, David.